The Teamsters Union will not issue an endorsement in the 2024 presidential election. It's the first time in nearly 30 years that the union is declining to endorse a candidate in a presidential race. And it's a blow to Democrats, as the union has consistently endorsed the party's candidate in recent election cycles. A poll of Teamsters members released today showed support for the Democratic ticket plummeting since President Biden's exit from the race. The poll showed former President Trump leading Vice President Harris 58% to 31%. In a statement, Teamsters General President Sean O'Brien said neither candidate was able to provide sufficient guarantees that they would put union workers over company profits.
You know, only consequential presidents get shot at.
Former President Donald Trump addressing a second assassination attempt that happened last weekend. The comments come in Trump's first public event since that attempt was thwarted. Trump participated in a town hall in Flint, Michigan, with his former press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. During the discussion, Trump spoke about receiving calls from both President Biden and Vice President Harris. Trump predicted doom for the auto industry if he does not win the election, and he mocked climate science while welcoming rising sea levels. White House columnist Niall Stanage joins us to discuss. Niall, what were your biggest takeaways from the Trump event?
I think the fact that this was his return to the campaign trail after the second assassination attempt against him was definitely significant, Drew. But in terms of the policies, I think the issue that you mentioned about the auto industry was the big one here. Obviously in Michigan, you know, the center traditionally of the American auto industry. Former President Trump predicting that industry would essentially be ruined if he didn't get re-elected. The veracity of that claim or not, that's a whole different question. But that seemed to be part of the main thrust of his remarks.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. During that town hall, Trump had this to say about the auto industry in Michigan.
I'll tell you this, and I'll say this for Michigan. If I don't win, you will have no auto industry within 2 to 3 years. It'll all be gone. And I know you got a little bit of an increase. It doesn't mean that's the small stuff, because it's just a temporary thing. Because you will not have any manufacturing plants. China is going to take over all of your business because of the electric car.
Now, data from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics shows that roughly 8,800 auto and parts manufacturing jobs were lost under Trump's first term, while that sector added about 128,000 jobs during the Biden administration. Now, I imagine some of that is likely COVID related, but those numbers seem to undercut Trump's claims here.
I think those statistics that you cited are very important, and I think whenever one looks at this empirically, it's pretty difficult to sustain the argument that Trump has tried to make. Now, it is true that he often goes for these big sort of banner headlines or sloganeering statements about he can save a particular industry, but those figures that you cited are very alarming. And it is possible, of course, that Democrats could still benefit from the saving of the auto industry back in President Obama's time, which has traditionally given the Democratic Party an advantage in Michigan since then.
Now, some Republican lawmakers actually think that second assassination attempt on former President Trump will lead to a rallying effect that could boost his campaign. And a new poll from Gallup does show Trump's favorability rating is up 5 points since last month. Another interesting point in that Gallup poll, Trump is nearly 10 points up when it comes to favorability among independents. Do you think there's anything to this attempted assassination glow that Trump appears to be enjoying?
You know, first of all, it's obviously difficult to talk about assassination attempts and then directly link them to electoral effects, but that's the business we're all in. I do think that there is perhaps some potential for voters very much in the middle ground, or perhaps some of these sort of soft Republicans who have some qualms about Mr. Trump personally, to be brought back on board out of a sympathy with him in the wake of this assassination attempt. And also, even though it was thankfully not as dramatic as the first shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, to have two of these attempts in roughly 9 weeks is very alarming, and I think does engender sympathy for Trump, at least among people who are somewhat open to voting for him.
Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine appeared on NewsNation's Cuomo and responded to Trump's unfounded accusations that Haitian migrants are eating people's pets in his state. Take a listen.
They're family-oriented. It's hurtful for them very, very much, and some of them are afraid. This whole thing about eating dogs and cats, and that's just it's very hurtful. It's not helpful to the people in Springfield.
Now, Trump says he will be visiting Springfield, Ohio, where those claims originate. Now, it sounds like local officials there are not too thrilled about that potential visit.
Yeah, that's right. The mayor of Springfield, Drew, has mentioned that he feels it would be an extreme strain on the city's resources for the former president to come to visit. I also think the argument about resources is maybe the most politically neutral way of expressing opposition to a Trump visit. It seems almost impossible to imagine the former president going to Springfield and backing off his original claims, despite the fact that they have been so thoroughly debunked. I imagine that he will go and try to defend the original claim, and the concern among people there seems to be that that would further inflame tensions, which are in no need of further inflammation, given that there's already been bomb threats and school closures, and on one occasion at least, an evacuation of the City Hall.
Kamala Harris sat down for an interview with the National Association of Black Journalists, where she was asked questions about her support among black voters, the war in Gaza, gun violence, and other issues. The Gaza exchange was one of the more contentious. Harris was pressed on whether her policies would differ in any way from Biden's. What did you make of her answer there?
I thought that it seems her policies will not actually differ all that much, or at least if they will, she's not prepared to admit that so far. She was pressed on that issue, as you say, Drew, and really she backed up President Biden's policy. And when the secondary question was asked about would there be any change, she seemed to kind of retreat and take refuge in these platitudes, really, about seeking a ceasefire. I mean, everyone basically wants or would like to see a ceasefire, at least within the American political establishment. But the question is how you get there. Do you apply more pressure to Israel than President Biden has been willing to do? Vice President Harris did not really provide much guidance as to what she was intending there.
With her sticking so closely to Biden's policies, it'll be interesting to see the reaction on the left. Frustration is boiling over among Senate Republicans over the inability of House Speaker Mike Johnson to move forward with a spending plan to avoid a government shutdown. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell says a shutdown would be politically beyond stupid. But Johnson is in a bit of a tough spot here. He canceled a vote last week on the same plan because it lacked Republican support. Has anything changed?
Not a whole lot to my mind, except Speaker Johnson seems determined to press ahead, and at least publicly he asserts that there is no Plan B. Plan A involves tethering the spending measure to this idea of non-citizens not being allowed to vote. Now, of course, non-citizens are already not allowed to vote. The complication here at its base, Drew, is really the math in the House, where Republicans have such a narrow majority. Speaker Johnson under pressure from various strands and factions within his own conference. But you mentioned the quote from Senator McConnell there. That, I think, speaks to the concern that Republicans in the upper house have about this going to the brink and perhaps over the brink in an election year.
Yeah, and who would be blamed for a potential shutdown if it happens? McConnell concerned that would in fact be Republicans. Another round of explosions involving communications devices rocked Lebanon today. Lebanese officials say at least one person is dead and another 100 were injured. This comes a day after a dozen people were killed and thousands of people were injured in an attack on communications devices that is believed to have been carried out by the Israeli government. Here is U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reacting after the initial attack yesterday.
The United States did not know about, nor was it involved in these incidents, and we're still gathering the information and gathering the facts. And we remain very clear about the importance of all parties avoiding any steps that could further escalate the conflict that we're trying to resolve in Gaza.
Now, the border between Israel and Lebanon was already a powder keg. And as a result of these attacks, are we any closer to war? And what does this mean for the prospects of a peace deal in Gaza?
I think the big danger here is an escalation in this conflict in the region. The Biden administration has previously said that avoiding such an escalation is its main priority. But it seems very difficult to imagine how it can be avoided now that we've had these attacks on 2 successive days. The Israelis will say that they are, of course, targeting Hezbollah members, but it seems pretty clear that at least some civilians have been caught up in these attacks on both occasions. That, I think, obviously risks reprisals from Hezbollah, and we do see the Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, talking about entering a new phase in the war. So it's a pretty bleak situation there, and not one that I see calming down anytime soon.
All right, that's all I got. Great insight as always. Niall Stanage, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Hip-hop megastar Sean Diddy Combs was denied bail Tuesday after appearing in court to face charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. He will now remain in federal custody until his trial. Those charges stem from an indictment that describes Diddy as the head of a criminal enterprise that coerced and abused women to fulfill his fantasies and protect his reputation. One of Diddy's attorneys spoke with News Nation's Chris Cuomo Tuesday after he was denied bail, saying she was surprised at the ruling.
He has done everything somebody under investigation can do. We knew that he was under investigation for racketeering and sex trafficking, and he stayed put. He committed not to fly out of the country. He stayed within the country, and they didn't ask that of him. That was a commitment he made. He's fighting, he's innocent, and he's going to be able to show it.
Combs and his attorneys are expected back in court Wednesday for a second bond hearing. The Senate split over the issue of in vitro fertilization, killing two separate bills to protect access to the procedure yesterday. All but two Senate Republicans voted to block the Democrats' bill to protect IVF. That bill included legal protections for providers and mandated insurance coverage. This is the second time the bill failed in the Senate. Democrats initially tried and failed to pass it in June. Then they reintroduced the bill after former President Trump indicated that he would be in favor of mandating coverage for IVF should he win the election in November. That vote came just hours after Democrats blocked a competing bill backed by Republicans. That bill would cut Medicaid funding to any state that bans IVF. Democrats say the bill didn't go far enough to protect access to the procedure. The federal government is launching a new effort to tax corporate profits. The Treasury Department unveiled the new set of proposals directed at corporations with profits of more than $1 billion. The rules would require those companies to pay a 15% minimum tax. Without that, the companies would have an average federal tax rate of 2.6%. The Treasury Department estimates the new rules would bring in $250 billion over the next decade. A hearing on the rules is scheduled for January 16th. Public comments on the proposal will be accepted through December 12th. Meanwhile, Senate Finance Committee Democrats are calling out loopholes used by wealthy individuals to avoid taxes, arguing that tax code passed during the Trump administration has devastated the budget. The Federal Reserve has cut interest rates by 0.5 point, signaling an easing of concerns over 4 years of steep inflation. Fed Chair Jerome Powell announced the cuts today. The decision puts the Fed in the crosshairs of a heated presidential election. Powell has taken flack from both sides of the aisle, with former President Trump accusing him of helping Democrats by making the changes just months before the election. Some Democrats, like Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, have also questioned the timing of the Fed's decisions on rate cuts. The Biden administration is proposing a new rule that would expand the number of electric vehicle chargers that are eligible for tax credits. The new rule specifies that the EV charger credit applies on a per-port basis. That means companies can claim the credit multiple times for a charging station that can charge multiple cars at once. The credit will only apply in areas that are either low income or are not urban. The House has passed a bill to patch a $3 billion budget shortfall for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The bill passed with bipartisan support after officials warned that millions of veterans were at risk of losing their benefits in the coming weeks. The agency cited the PACT Act, which helped address burn pit victims, as a key driver of the budget shortfall. That's because it led to an increased enrollment in VA health care and appointments after it was passed in 2022. The bill now heads to the Senate, where members of both parties are hopeful it will pass. You can now apply for a passport renewal fully online, according to a new initiative by the State Department. The new online system bypasses the requirements of a print application and sending a check through the mail, and will allow you to get your passport renewal in about a third of the time compared to last summer. Passports regularly take 6 to 8 weeks of processing time, and the State Department still recommends not having any travel plans within 8 weeks of renewing a passport through the online system. Individuals who qualify for the renewal must be over the age of 25 and live in the U.S. or a U.S. territory. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.